The woman in the red blazer didn't knock. She marched up the dirt path like she owned the place, heels sinking into the dry Texas soil, face already twisted with fury. "This property is in violation of our code," she barked before I could even ask her name. "You owe $250,000, that was the first time I heard her voice. It wouldn't be the last. I was still unpacking when she appeared. Boxes stacked high on the front porch of the ranch I'd inherited just 3 weeks earlier after my grandfather passed. I hadn't even put my tools away. The horses were restless, in the barn, still adjusting to me. And yet, somehow, this stranger thought she had the authority to stride onto my land like a sheriff from hell. Have you ever had someone show up at your door and demand money for something you didn't even know existed? My name's Matthew Reyes. I'm 28, and until a month ago I was working late nights at a body shop in Fort Worth, barely scraping by. When Grandpa passed, he left me this sprawling piece of land outside Waller County. 60 acres of open pasture, aging fences, and more memories than I could count. It was supposed to be my fresh start, my peace, my freedom. But freedom doesn't come easy when the system's rigged against you. "Excuse me?" I asked her, stepping off the porch with my hands still covered in sawdust. "Who are you?" "Margaret Evers," she said, flashing a smug badge clipped to her chest. "President of the Lakeside Homeowners Association. We sent you 3 notices last month." I stared at her, stunned. "I don't live in Lakeside. This is Cedar Bluff Ranch." She scoffed like I'd told a joke. "That may be, Mr. Reyes, but several properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction. Your fencing, your livestock, and your lack of compliance are in direct violation of HOA Code 5.2b. The fines have accumulated. You are now liable for $250,000 in non-compliance penalties." It took everything in me not to laugh in her face. "Lady, this ranch has been here since before your subdivision existed." She raised an eyebrow, pulled a folder from her bag, and dropped it at my feet. "Read it and get a lawyer. You have 30 days to comply or we'll begin legal proceedings. That includes a lien on this property." And just like that, she turned and walked off, dust clouds rising behind her heels. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Grandpa's old oak desk in the study, flipping through yellowing maps, land surveys, and every deed he had locked away in his file cabinet. He was meticulous about paperwork. Every barbed wire fence and every water line he ever paid for was cataloged. The boundaries were clear. This land, every inch of it, belonged to the Reyes family since 1954. No HOA, no lakeside, no outside. Control. So how the hell were they demanding money? At sunrise, I took my truck up the ridge where the pasture curved downhill toward the creek. That's when I saw it. A paved walking path lined with decorative stones and solar lights, right on my property. And beyond that, a set of townhomes with manicured lawns and little white mailboxes that weren't there 3 years ago. I stood, frozen at the tree line, mouth dry, fists clenched. They didn't just show up at my gate. They had built on my grandfather's land, without permission, without warning. Suddenly, the $250,000 demand made sense. They weren't trying to collect a fine. They were trying to intimidate me into silence. They built part of their development across the boundary line, and now they were hoping I wouldn't notice. But I did. You ever have a moment when you realize you're being played, where the system is trying to bury you under paperwork, hoping you don't have the means or the knowledge to fight back? That was my moment, and I wasn't about to be buried. The next week was a blur of phone calls, dusty courthouses, and tense meetings with lawyers who looked at me like I was already defeated. "HOAs don't make mistakes like this," one of them told me. "If they're demanding money, they've already got a paper trail that'll choke a judge." But I wasn't looking for a courtroom win. I was looking for the truth. Every evening, I walked the ranch lines, GPS in one hand, Grandpa's maps in the other. And every evening I found more violations. A street lamp anchored into my soil, a drainage pipe carved across the north paddock. Even a children's park built right up against my property, where the HOA had torn down part of my old boundary fence and replaced it with a plastic one. They built all of it, on land they didn't own, and now they wanted me to pay them for not asking permission. Margaret showed up again on the 10th day. this time with 2 men in tow, one holding a clipboard, the other carrying a camera. She looked past me like I was an inconvenience. "You haven't responded. That's a breach of process." I stepped forward. "You've got 3 picnic benches, 2 storm drains, and a sidewalk sitting on my grandfather's land. You want to talk about breach?" The camera guy flinched. Margaret didn't. "We'll see you in court," she said, and turned away again. But this time, I didn't let her leave. "You think just because I'm not wearing a suit or living in one of your white picket boxes I won't fight back?" I said, voice steady but cold. "This isn't about fines. This is about theft, and you're going to answer for it." Her smile faltered, just for a second, and then it came back. Tight, rehearsed, hollow. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Mr. Reyes." That night I made a promise to myself. They would regret ever stepping foot on Reyes soil. I started with the county records. Turns out the HOA had filed their subdivision plans 3 years earlier, but the zoning office had flagged a section for further review. That section? The exact parcel now covered by sidewalks and fountains. The review was never completed. The map was pushed through after a correction letter arrived from someone within the city council. But the real kicker? That letter was signed by a councilman who retired the very next day. Corruption. Plain and simple. I wasn't just facing a nosy neighborhood committee. I was going up against a well-connected network that bent rules, forged lines, and bullied locals into silence, except I wasn't going to be silent. I called the local news station. They didn't answer. I emailed them photographs, then drone footage of the construction line overlapping the ranch boundary. Still nothing. So I showed up at their office with a stack of documents and a very loud, very public question. What happens when a homeowners association illegally builds on a family's land and then charges the family for the privilege? That got their attention. Within 48 hours, I was sitting across from an anchor with a camera rolling, telling the world how the HOA had stolen from me, from my grandfather, and from the legacy he built with his bare hands. When the story aired, that night Margaret's name was right there in the lower third of the screen. Margaret Evers, HOA President, Lakeside Estates. And for the first time, the pressure wasn't on me. It was on them. The next morning, a new letter arrived. Not taped to my gate, not mailed, but hand-delivered by a courier wearing a full suit and tie. It was an offer. They would drop all fines, cease legal threats, and pay me $20,000 if I signed a release acknowledging their right-of-way usage. I didn't even finish reading it. Because this wasn't about money anymore. This was about principle, about justice, about making sure that no one, no HOA, no councilman, no smug woman in red heels, ever thought they could roll over someone like me again. I didn't want their hush money. I wanted a reckoning. 2 days after the news story aired, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Most calls were from people I'd never met, some offering support, others sharing their own HOA horror stories. A retired veteran from Georgia told me his HOA tried to evict him for flying the American flag too high. A single mom from Arizona said they fined her for planting the wrong species of flower in her own garden. One message, though, stopped me cold. It was from a surveyor named Charles Brandt. "I saw your story," his voicemail began. "I was the original field surveyor for Lakeside Estates before construction started. I was fired halfway through the project for asking questions about parcel boundaries. If you want the real story, call me." I called him within minutes. We met the next morning in the corner booth of a sleepy diner off County Road 6. Charles was in his 60s, with weathered hands and a gaze that didn't flinch. He brought maps, his own copies, stamped and dated, and laid them out on the table, like he was unfolding a crime scene. "Your landline was never supposed to be touched," he said. "The developer's plan clearly showed the HOA limit ending 150 feet short of your property. But 3 months before the build began, I got a revised site plan. No explanation. No updated permit trail." He tapped the corner of the paper, the bowl. New map had a faked signature from a different surveyor. I reported it. 2 weeks later, I was pulled from the job. My blood ran cold. "They forged survey documents?" I asked. Charles nodded. They did more than that. They redrew your land as undeclared public utility buffer zone, which doesn't legally exist in county records. It's a fake designation. They knew it. But the city never challenged it. I stared at the map, tracing the line with my finger. That new walking path, the playground, the decorative lighting, all of it sat inside the forged buffer. They used a lie to steal my land. Charles leaned forward. And they're counting on you not having the money to expose it. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not just emotionally, but tactically. This wasn't just about standing my ground. It was about building my case the way they built theirs, on paper, in silence, behind desks and doors no one noticed. I needed proof. I spent the next 10 days knee-deep in public records. Every lunch hour and late night was spent inside the archives office, chasing down contracts, permits, zoning appeals, and development records. It didn't take long to uncover the cracks. Lakeside Estates had submitted 3 separate zoning requests for expansion. The first 2 were rejected due to boundary concerns. The third one, magically approved, contained altered maps and was backed by a letter of endorsement from Councilman Roy Edmonds, the same Edmonds who mysteriously retired the very next day. Dug deeper. That letter came from a private legal office, one that just so happened to be run by Margaret's brother. That's when the pieces clicked. Margaret Evers wasn't just an HOA president. She was part of a web. Real estate developers, city officials, and private attorneys, all working together to push boundaries, both legal and literal, to fatten their bottom line. And my grandfather's land had been their shortcut. By weeks, and I had a growing folder of damning documents, forged signatures, zoning maps with conflicting lines, early-stage site plans that showed no encroachment, and late-stage ones that placed public fixtures deep into our ranch. Every detail was marked, time-stamped, cataloged, but I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed one more piece. I needed to know how they got past my grandfather in the first place. Grandpa Reyes was a stubborn old cowboy. He never backed down from a fight. He kept receipts for fence repairs from the 80s and handwrote notes about water rights like his life depended on it. There's no way he didn't know about the HOA's expansion. So why didn't he stop them? I found the answer in a battered leather notebook stuffed between 2 outdated land tax files in his cabinet. The final entry was dated 14 months before he died. His handwriting, once sharp and tight, was now shaky and faint. They came. Again. Woman from Lakeside offered some easement contract, said they just needed the edge for runoff, told them no, like before. She didn't like that. Asked me how much longer I planned to hold on to this place. I told her, until the day they bury me here. Beneath it was one more line, nearly illegible. 3 weeks later, someone tore down the west fence. I called the sheriff. They said it was a civil matter. Told me to get a lawyer. I knew then. They weren't going to stop. My throat tightened. My grandfather had tried. He saw what was coming. But they waited. They watched. And when he got too old and too tired to fight, they made their move. I closed the notebook and sat there for a long time, my hands shaking. They didn't just build on my land. They harassed an old man, waited for him to weaken, then stole what he spent his life defending. This was personal now. I brought all the documents to a young land use attorney named Gabriela Ruiz, whose name came recommended by 3 different people who had taken on bad HOAs. She flipped through the stack like a detective at a crime scene. This is more than a boundary dispute, she said. This is fraud. We can sue. Quiet title action, damages, even a criminal complaint. I don't want to sue yet, I told her. I want leverage. Her eyebrows lifted. You have more in mind? I nodded. Margaret and her board have been hiding behind fake documents and silence. I want to turn up the pressure. Make them panic. And when they do, they'll make a mistake. That's when we strike. Gabriela grinned. I like the way you think. We started with formal notices, sent not just to the HOA board but to every homeowner in Lakeside Estates. Copies of the survey discrepancies, photos of encroachment, and a clear statement. Your community amenities may be illegally located, on private land. If you are paying dues for features that sit outside the HOA's ownership, you have a right to know. The reaction was instant. Emails poured in from confused and angry residents. Margaret's office line went dark. Within 48 hours, the HOA issued a cease and desist letter to me, claiming I was harassing their residents. We published that letter on a public HOA accountability forum. Then we dropped the next blow. Charles, the original surveyor, agreed to sign a sworn affidavit detailing the forgery and forced dismissal. We attached it to a formal complaint with the county ethics office and copied the local media. Now it wasn't just a land dispute, it was a scandal. And Margaret? She finally cracked. She called me, personally. Her voice was less polished this time. There was panic in it. Mr. Reyes, this has gone too far. You're creating hysteria over technicalities. We can still come to an agreement, privately. No, I said. Now we're going public, she hissed through the phone. You're going to regret this. I almost laughed. I already did, I said. But not anymore. When I hung up, I looked out over the ridge again. The sun was setting behind the HOA's townhomes, casting long shadows across the illegally built path that snaked into my soil. Their silence was no longer protection, it was evidence. Their lies were now bricks in the wall that would collapse on them. And me? I was just getting started. I always believed revenge was a dish best served cold, but this wasn't revenge. This was justice, precision engineered and patiently constructed, one affidavit and boundary pin at a time. The HOA didn't know it yet, but I had every legal route mapped out, every loophole closed, every fuse lit. Now it was time to strike the match. Gabriella and I filed a quiet title action in district court, a lawsuit that challenges the legitimacy of someone else's claim to your property. It was the kind of move that didn't just cause a stir, it shattered silence like a dropped glass. The moment the lawsuit was served, Margaret and the board lawyered up, but it was already too late. Because I wasn't just coming after their documents. I was coming after their foundation, literally. We filed a separate injunction against Lakeside Estates to freeze all maintenance, renovations, and dues collection tied to structures located on my parcel until the dispute was resolved. That meant the HOA couldn't legally collect fees for the playground, the path, the community benches, or the security lighting. All of it was entangled in legal limbo now. The shockwaves hit instantly. Residents started demanding answers at every board meeting. Margaret tried to spin it, claiming it was a technical boundary clarification. But I'd already leaked side-by-side maps to a local reporter, showing the difference between the original and forged survey records. The story ran with a devastating headline. HOA president accused of building community amenities on stolen land. By the end of the week, over 40 homeowners had signed a petition to audit HOA funds and remove the current board. Still, Margaret wasn't ready to fold. She called a private emergency meeting at the HOA's office building, a structure ironically also standing on my land. I showed up uninvited, clutching a manila envelope under my arm. As I pushed through the front doors, every board member went silent. Margaret stood at the far end of the table, stiff-backed, her jaw set like concrete. She didn't smile. "You're not welcome here," she said. "I was never welcome," I replied. "But I'm still here." She motioned to one of the security guards at the door. "Escort him out." That's when I opened the envelope and dropped 3 thick pages on the table, copies of county permits tied to the HOA's irrigation lines, lighting systems, and concrete paving. All of it permitted under the forged survey documents. All of it now under formal investigation by the county inspector general. "If you touch me, it's witness intimidation," I said calmly. "And if you continue to collect dues tied to these utilities, I'll file a fraud complaint on behalf of every homeowner here." A beat of silence. Margaret didn't blink, but I saw her throat tighten. Her hands were clenched so hard her knuckles turned white. "Enjoy your meeting," I said, turning to leave. "It may be your last." That wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. Over the next 72 hours, the situation snowballed. 3 residents filed small claims against the HOA, arguing misrepresentation. Another filed for a dues escrow account, refusing to pay until the encroachment was resolved. Then, the bomb dropped. The county clerk's office issued a formal notice of investigation into the original plat filings from Lakeside Estates. That meant document forensics, witness interviews, and legal scrutiny of every signature and survey line submitted since the project began. Margaret's web was unraveling. Gabriella smiled when we got the notice. "This is how cartels fall," she said. "Not with sirens, with paperwork." But I wasn't satisfied yet. The HOA still hadn't backed down publicly. They were clinging to a fantasy that this could still be contained, that maybe I'd settle quietly, or the county wouldn't follow through. They were wrong. I sent one final letter, 1 page, no emotion, just facts. To the Board of Lakeside Estates HOA, you have 15 days to vacate all structures, utilities, and fixtures built on parcel 107B, which remains under private ownership. Failure to comply will result in civil damages for trespass, misuse of land, and unlawful enrichment. Respectfully, Matthew Reyes. They didn't respond, but their silence was confirmation. They had no move left to make. 2 days later, I got a visit I didn't expect. A man in a dark suit showed up at my ranch gate. I recognized him from a city council photo. Jacob Donnelly, a private development attorney who once represented Lakeside's parent builder. "I'm here off the record," he said. "May I come in?" I nodded, keeping my expression cold. We sat under the old pecan tree near the stable. He didn't waste time. "Margaret is stepping down. The board's dissolving." I said nothing. "We're prepared to offer you a formal easement agreement. $75,000 up front, full utility relocation within 6 months, and a public apology." I looked him dead in the eyes. "You built on a dead man's land. You harassed him in his final years. Then you tried to shake me down for $250,000. You don't get to apologize with a check." He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "What do you want, Mr. Reyes?" I leaned forward slowly. "I want acknowledgement. Full admission of boundary fraud filed with the county. I want an HOA-wide meeting where I address your members, uninterrupted. And I want damages, enough to replace the stolen piece my grandfather never got back." "How much?" he asked. $250,000, I replied. The exact amount Margaret tried to squeeze from me. He paused, calculating. "I'll need board approval." "You don't have 15 days, I said, rising to my feet. "You have 7. I walked away before he could answer. The sun was setting again, painting the land in gold. I stood on the edge of the pasture, right where the playground sat on stolen dirt. Kids weren't playing there anymore. The HOA had shut it down out of safety concerns. No laughter, no motion, just silence and reckoning. They thought I was a rancher without a fight. They forgot that land is more than property. It's memory, legacy, honor. They trespassed on all of it. Now they would pay." The day of the meeting arrived with no banners, no celebration. Just a cold wind slicing across the ranch land and clouds hanging low like judgment over Lakeside Estates. I wore my grandfather's old leather coat. The same one he used to patch with his own hands. The one he wore while fixing fences, checking cattle, watching sunsets over the ridge. Today it felt like armor. Gabriella stood beside me at the HOA community center. Yes, the same one built on my soil. Her voice was calm, but there was fire behind it. "You're not just speaking for yourself today," she whispered. "You're speaking for every person who's ever been bullied by a system hiding behind rules." I nodded. I wasn't here for revenge. I wasn't here to humiliate anyone. I was here to close the circle. The room was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents, homeowners, young families, retirees, even the landscaper I remembered from the day they blocked my gate. They all turned to watch as I stepped to the podium. Margaret wasn't there. Her name had been scrubbed from the HOA website 3 days ago, replaced by an interim president, a retired Air Force veteran named Tom Grady, a man who spoke little, but with conviction. Tom stood quietly by the back wall as I cleared my throat and spoke into the mic. "Thank you for being here. I said. Most of you don't know me, at least not by name. I'm Matthew Reyes. My grandfather, Hector Reyes, owned this ranch long before Lakeside Estates was even a concept in a boardroom. Before the paved roads, before the mailboxes, before the bylaws. A few heads nodded. I didn't come here to demand anything from you. I came to make something clear. Your community, your playground, your walking path, the benches under those cedar trees, they were built on my land. Not figuratively, literally. You've been paying dues for features that don't legally belong to this HOA. The room shifted. Murmurs began to rise, questions buzzing like static. I raised a hand. This isn't your fault. The fault lies with those who knew the truth and chose to bury it beneath paperwork and pressure. But I didn't come to punish. I came to end it. I pulled out the signed agreement from Jacob Donnelly, now notarized and filed. I'm officially transferring an easement to the HOA for access to the disputed land, for parks, walking paths, and non-commercial community use. In return, you will compensate me for the unauthorized use of my land, based on your own board's valuation, $250,000, the exact amount your previous board tried to extract from me. Gasps now, a few audible curses under breath. I didn't want your money, I wanted justice, and now that justice is done, I'm giving you something your last president never gave me, respect. I turned to Tom Grady, who gave a slow, solemn nod. We accept the terms, he said, and we thank you. That was it. No applause, no fireworks. Just the sound of resolution. Quiet, steady, real. I walked out of the community center into the cool air, Gabriella trailing behind. You did it, she said. I shook my head. No. He did it. I looked out over the land, golden and sprawling under the rising sun. I just finished what he couldn't. The next few weeks moved quickly. The HOA publicly released a financial audit. Margaret was named in a civil investigation regarding misuse of authority and document forgery. She vanished from the town almost overnight, moved out quietly like someone retreating into the shadows. The $250,000 settlement arrived by certified check. I didn't cash it right away. Instead, I placed it on my grandfather's workbench, in the barn, and left it there for 2 full days just to sit with it, not as money, but as memory, a receipt for everything they took and everything we reclaimed. With part of the funds, I hired a local artist to build a new archway at the edge of the ranch, right where the old gate used to stand. Wrought iron, hand-forged, etched, with words that stopped every visitor in their tracks. This land remembers, a tribute to the man who built it with blistered hands, and a warning to anyone who thought legacy could be erased by paperwork. That winter, I received a letter from one of the Lakeside homeowners, a single mom named Natalie. She'd brought her kids to play in the park since they were toddlers. She wrote, I didn't know what they did to your family. I'm sorry. I'm glad someone stood up to them. You reminded us all what real ownership means, not just of land, but of truth. I read that letter under the same pecan tree where I first met with Donnelly, the same tree my grandfather used to nap under after sunrise chores, the same one I'll sit beneath someday when I pass this ranch to the next generation. Because this wasn't just about land, it was about silence, and who gets to break it. It was about legacy and who gets to keep it, and most of all, it was about standing when no one else would, until standing becomes something others learn to do too.